So the first module is AI evolution. We'll discuss about what is AI and the AI evolution. So as we all hear, artificial intelligence is the hottest topic of the 21st century. There are various technology solutions providers that are taking the opportunity to rebrand their existing solution to artificial intelligence. A lot of discussions on the huge market opportunity, the challenges, and the hype around artificial intelligence. But before talking about all in details, let's start first with defining what is artificial intelligence. Simply, artificial intelligence is a machine's ability to mimic the human behavior in learning and reasoning. On the other level of scientific field, artificial intelligence encompasses many other fields including computer science, philosophy, psychology, and many other areas. As we can see, this definition is very broad and can cover huge possibilities. That's why we never need to identify specific characteristic for any AI system. Starting with the reasoning as a main characteristics for any AI solutions, the ability to draw inferences based on the situation and based on the context. Then the learning and the ability to learn based on historical data, the input data, and the feedback system. Third, the problem solving. Any AI solution should be able to solve complex problems either on specific level domain or general level domain. And finally, the big data AI solution should be able to process huge amount of data, either structured or unstructured. So AI is not a new concept. It might be surprising that AI is not a new concept. The first time we heard about artificial intelligence was in 1950s when Alan Turing developed the Turing test, which is the test of machine's ability to exhibit any intelligent behavior equivalent to a human intelligence. In the same decade, the term artificial intelligence was coined and scientists started to show huge interest in artificial intelligence research, including machine learning, research, perceptions, shallow neural network, and many others. But 1970s, this interest started to decrease due to lack of computational power that can support such technology. Many trials continued and some of them were successful, including IBM and Deep Blue Computer, which was able to beat the role of champion in chess, Gary Kasparov. And starting from 2008, the revolution of AI is back, and this is synchronized with the invention of individuous graphic processing cards. In 2010, Nvidia's GPUs were introduced for deep learning application, and also huge investments were done from all joint technology companies. Apple introduced Siri, Amazon introduced Echo, and many other applications were introduced in artificial intelligence area. Starting from 2016, deep learning started to achieve superhuman level of perceptions. In 2017, Nvidia introduced the DGX family, the first super purpose-built supercomputer for artificial intelligence application, and the research into AI continued till today, and now we see that AI can help cure cancer, prevent cyber attack, and build self-driven cars. Now we know that AI is not a new concept. People used to classify AI into traditional AI era and modern AI era. Traditional AI era represent traditional problems in AI. Before the invention of GPU cards, traditional AI problem included expert systems which were meant to simulate the judgment of human with experts, mostly represented in SN rule rather than using regular procedural codes also. And traditional AI problem includes knowledge representation about the real world to complex problems like ontology, also included planning, search, optimization problems under certain constraints like supply chain, transportation, logistic problem, production planning, and finally fuzzy logic problems. So AI has been revolutionized in last 10 years. A modern AI era is represented in the oil revolution in last decade. The graphics, the invention of the GPUs worked as a game changer in the development of AI solutions. Synchronized with fourth industrial revolution, an increased number of connected devices resulted in huge availability of data, either structured or non-structured. On the other hand, giant technology companies invested a lot in the development of deep learning application. Now we have deep neural networks that can solve very complex problems and achieve results and accuracies we haven't achieved before. Introducing advanced analytics that can leverage statistics, probabilities, calculus, linear algebra helped us a lot to gain more understanding of the problem we are solving and helped us more insights on the data we are representing. All of these factors worked together to decrease the time in AI research and give us more faster results that can help us now to use AI in most industrial sector, starting from banking, healthcare, security, surveillance, agriculture, and so on. So despite the potential of AI, we need to be very cautious when it comes to expectations from AI. We need to understand what AI can do and what it cannot do. The idea of general AI that can replace human in all aspects is by far very far from us. We are still in a narrow AI era. Chess computers can beat human in playing chess, but it cannot solve a complex math problem. In narrow AI, each specific algorithm is designed to solve a specific problem. Narrow AI systems can do much better as the tasks they are made for than humans like facial recognition, chess computers, and so on. But still, the human element in playing a very key role in understanding the context of the problem, prioritize work across the different algorithms, communicate with the outcomes of AI model efficiently. But the AI agent still can't transfer the knowledge from one problem to another problem. Market opportunity. So the current revolution of AI wouldn't have happened without the support from giant technology companies and the investments from different enterprises in different AI solutions, either on implementation level or R&D level. Now I want to talk more about the great market opportunities for AI solutions. Let's talk first generally about the numbers of AI. IDC predicts the spending on AI solutions to reach around $77 billion in 2022, which is more than 3 times what it was in 2018. Also, we have a couple of studies here represent the adoption level of AI solution. Talking about KPMG study, for example, which was done in 2019, on 590 enterprises in all AI subfields, we can see that more than 50% of the enterprise is either implementing AI, moving into production, or in piloting phase. We can imagine that this percentage of course will increase after the COVID-19 situation, where AI solutions are helping a lot in accelerating research path in COVID-19 vaccines, detecting COVID-19 patients and cluster of infections as well. McKinsey also did another study to see if the enterprise are at least embedding 1 or 2 AI functionality in the enterprise operations for different markets. And we have 3 different market segments. For example, on the developing markets like China, computer vision functionality comes at the highest, and then we see the robotic process automation and natural language processing in North America and Europe comes the highest functionality that are being used. And also from the return of investment perspective, we can see that the ROI is very huge, uh, or in technology-based industries like telco, entertainment, technology services as well. Now we can see the great market opportunity of AI and the potential of AI. Let's talk more about the benefits achieved with AI on the company and business levels. With the capability of AI now almost available to everyone, businesses look to push the boundaries of what they can do with AI in the current way of adaptation. Many businesses seems to focus more on improving what they have on rather than creating something new. AI adaptation is offering many efficient related benefits, including automating processes to enable people to focus more on high value tasks, improving supply chain, using predictive maintenance to reduce downtime, optimize advertising, and speed hiring. From the graph here, we can see that making the process more efficient and enhancement of current products and services come as the highest benefit of adopting AI solutions. Across all the functional area, two-thirds of the implementation are used for automation or optimization versus enhancing the capability of individuals. Also enhancing customer relations in huge benefits as well. Chatbots, for example, or revolutionizing customer support, they are able to deliver valuable insights into consumer preference, behaviors, sentiments, and can be used to deliver personalized experience through the overall customer lifecycle. We will discuss on some of the AI adaptation challenges in general. These are some of the challenges in AI transformation. So now we can see why AI is taking that much attention with all the capabilities and huge market opportunities, but still adopting AI solution is not an easy job, mostly either on the level of development or deployment. There are some challenges faced by enterprises to adopt the AI solution. These challenges range from lack of strategy and key talents that can support such technology to cybersecurity and data issues and integration complexity. In this session, we will focus on the infrastructure related problem, and we will see together how the Nvidia DGX system makes difference here. Main challenges in the area is to find the infrastructure that can help in all phases of AI innovation, from the inspiration where the tools need to be built, the best model, do the training, evolution, choose a model that is the fastest time to the solution, to production where IT needs to standardize an approach from AI infrastructure to support heterogeneous workloads, predictive performance and security at every layer. Let's discuss more details on the infrastructure challenges. This helps us to understand more the added value of Nvidia DGX does in an AI solution area. On the level of design and solution deliverables, developing AI solution is challenging and takes very long time, especially to find the best architecture that delivers the best performance and can scale. You need to try different models and train them, and the training process usually takes very long. On the level of software stack, AI solution requires integration across multiple layers. Usually these are from different vendors and requires multiple points of support, and integration is very complex and time consuming, and also need to, and if it affects the overall complexity that is involved in the deployment. And generally AI solution deployment can be very complex task due to the required computational power, storage, networking issue, and resource management. Other considerations for choosing the AI platform includes we need to choose the platform that increase productivity. Let the data scientists and AI engineers focus on the design more than focusing on the integration and help to decrease the overall deployment life cycle time. We need to consider scaling issues and ensure that the current GPU computational power can support the scaling and can provide required performance. And finally, the total cost of ownership to get the lowest upfront cost. Now we have an idea about the infrastructure challenges. Let's now see how DGX makes a difference when compared to other hardware servers. The DGX provides a full stack AI workflow that can ensure both data science productivity and IT manageability. On the level of data science supports, the DGX provides a complete software stack that enables the system to be very fast and process large volume of data. This software stack starts from the OS, the GPU drivers, and accesses all the frameworks, all customized to support the GPUs. This stack is also continuously optimized by Nvidia to ensure that it achieves the best performance possible. So the system is ready to be developed and deploy the AI solution without hassles of solving version computational issues. Also, it provides bunch of tools that can make the process much easier, including dataset management tools, model deployment services, different user management. On the level of system integrators and development operations, the DGX supports with the number of resource management, the GPU management software, the system monitoring, the reporting, including health checks, system usage, also cluster management and provisioning, including OS provisioning and network assignments. And lastly, on top of all we mentioned on the DGX software and the hardware capabilities, a new feature is added to the DGX A100, which is the multi-instance GPU or MIG for short form. The MIG feature allows the GPUs to be sliced into several portions to allow full utilization of the GPU. It allows the GPUs to be allocated to different workloads and can support training plus inferencing and analysis at the same time. And the resource can be shared among all of them with flexibility to reassign the resource with time. While on the other hand, traditional infrastructure is constrained, this causes infrastructure silos, waste capacity, and AI workload starvation. So in one scenario, the GPUs can be optimally utilized by training cluster and inference cluster is underutilized. We will go through all the details of the DGX software stack and their capabilities and how to access and use them, and we cover also the AI application. This was just a warm-up to get into the AI field and the Nvidia DGX. Let's now jump to the hardware installation of the DGX. Important step in DGX installation is the DGX site survey. So I'll give you an overview about what it includes, what are the steps that needs to be taken by the customer and the partner before proceeding for the installation. So site survey is a very important step before we proceed for installation. So in this section, we'll discuss about what is it, who needs to fill this document, how do we get this approved by Nvidia, and what happens after a site survey is approved. So we'll go through the brief steps of site survey. So the site survey document, it's an Excel sheet, which is a Google Sheet spreadsheet, which can be downloaded from the link below. and you would need to fill all the information which has been requested. You can work closely with your Nvidia sales team or solution architect or the IngramMicro lead, which would help you to fill the information that has been requested in this document. Primary information that is requested is basically the customer information, the company name, the contact person, email address, the location where the A100 needs to be delivered, and the installation details, where the location of the installation would be. It also contains the information, the system specification in terms of the packet size, the system weight size, how many U's are required for installation, what is the idle airflow and the noise requirement, the power requirement, the voltage requirement, the PDU requirement. It also have information on the heat dissipation of the unit and the required operating temperature of the system. It also has some information regarding delivery and handling. So where you would be asked for certain information, if server lifts are available, if it is available, then what are the brands and the models. So there's a lot of information that is requested. In the document, there is also information with regards to the space and the rack consideration in terms of what racks are available, what is the idle rack depth and width that needs to be considered, right? And also have some information on how DGX needs to be installed in the rack, the cable, the optimal cabling requirements, the power requirements, the thermal considerations. There are also information requested for the enterprise NGC portal for the customer in order to access the GPU cloud account. So there is information that is requested. If customer is an existing Nvidia customer, does it have the account? If not, then Nvidia would help them to create an account in the NGC cloud. There are also information with regards to the network. So in terms of the network requirement for the data as well as for the management, which is the BMC. So this document helps you to note down information. So if there is already a IP address that has been assigned or reserved for the system, you could note down all this information, including the IP address, the net mask, the gateway information. There is also information requested with regards to the cluster ports, which is the Mellanox ports, which is required for clustering. So all this information can be found in this document, right? So once you have this information filled, which needs to be sent to Nvidia for their approval. These are some of the sections within the site survey that I briefly discussed on earlier. So this information is must to be filled by the customer and agreed by the customer. So the site survey spreadsheet need to be emailed to DGX A100 install@nvidia.com. So once the document is sent, it is reviewed by a committee, and you could expect some questions or comment. Some of this comment or could be where they would request more information, or could be some specific flags raised during the review, which Nvidia believe needs to be resolved before the installation. And once the approval is sought or received, the system is marked to be shipped from the factory. So the next section we will check how to carry on with the physical installation of an Nvidia A100 system. Before you proceed with the installation, it is important that you have the right set of tools. So a pallet jack, mechanical lift with a capacity of at least 160 plus kg, a safety gloves, a safety strap and door stops, a laptop, USB key which is required during firmware installation or re-imaging of a DGX server, screwdriver, KVM, an anti-static wrist strap, tie wrap, box cutter, a permanent marker, marking tape, and at least 2 people for the installation. Also make sure that you have done the site survey and completed the site survey document and submitted to Nvidia before you proceed with the installation. So the first step once you receive the server is to inspect the packaging and open the box. You would need to check the package, shock and tilt sensor to see if they are triggered. And if they are triggered, you would need to contact enterprise support of Nvidia and check with them on the next steps. You would also need to remove the cardboard in order to reveal the server packaging. As you see, the indicators of the sensors that you see on the box itself. So these are the shock and the tilt sensor. And if the metal ball inside moves out of the initial position, that means that the box is gone or the packaging is gone through a shock or tilt during transportation. Another important steps while receiving the system is to inspect the package and make sure there are no holes or moisture on the box. And if there is any damage that is found, you would need to report this immediately to Nvidia Enterprise Support. Use a pallet jack and you could move the system from the receiving area to a staging area. You would also need to remove the 4 plastic clips that's on both sides of the box in order to release the box cover. So the next step would be to open the cardboard box and remove the wooden frame. So once the 4 clips are removed, it is easy to pull the cardboard box upwards in order to remove the cardboard box and get access to the system inside. You would need to confirm the content inside the box. So you would find the server, the bezel kit, the rack mount kit, the power cables, the flash drive for the open source software. So all those boxes could be found inside once you open the main box. So the rack mount kit installation is one of the first steps during the system installation. It helps to act like a shelf in the rack. It does not allow the system to be moved once it's installed, and all the components are serviceable either from the front or the rear. Generally, a rack mount kit which is supplied with the systems are extended lengthwise. So typically it can hold, it can move from a distance between a post of range of 29 inch to 35 inch. So some of the components to be noted, the lip which is at the bottom, which holds the bottom of the system, to the prongs which enters a hole of the rack, either square or round, the metal plates which keeps the kit in place, and then lastly you have the provided screws that secures the rack mount kit to the rack. So the next step is to confirm the necessary steps. So you would need to make sure that you have the right screws. You would see that you have two different sets of screws. The front screws are different from the rear screws. So you need to make sure that you use the correct screws in the front. If it is not used, then you would find it difficult to push the server against the rack. Which is important is to be sure where you would want your system to be installed, right? So based either you install on the first rack unit or the second rack unit. So you would need to be very sure before installing the rack mount kit where the server needs to be installed in the rack. One of the biggest challenge is some of the mechanical lift, they generally would not go low to the first or second rack unit. So you would need to be sure before securing your rack mount kit where the server needs to be installed. You would need to proceed with the same steps for the right side of the rack mount kit, but just make sure that once the right side is installed, you screw both sides and make sure that the rack kit is completely secured in the rack before you proceed with mounting of the server on the rack. So the next step would be to install the cage nuts. There is a template that is included as part of the rack kit, and it should be used to align the desired location of the system to where the included cage nuts has to be installed. These templates are double-sided, so it can be used as a reference on the left and the right post of the rack. Usually it is only needed in racks where the rack mount kit does not reach the frontmost post in the rack. You would need to run a safety check just to make sure and confirm that both sides are aligned and horizontal. Both lips are of the same height on all four posts. The metal clips are properly attached. The 4 screw nuts installed on the bottom holes. There are no obstructions at the back of the rack so that you could service the system. You could deploy the cables or do the cable management and install the PDUs. So once the safety check is done, the next step is to make sure that you remove the system and transport the system. So make sure that you remove the foam. The upper side and the front foams are removed. Open the flap, remove the lower side foam and move the system. So once you remove the system, you would need to confirm from which side would the lift will approach the rack. So confirm if the rack has a door, and if it has, it may get in the way when approaching the rack. The system can be unloaded from a packaging from either side, which can provide an option to accommodate the obstacles like a rack door. This will also allow you to position the system on a mechanical lift so that the rack can be approached from either left or the right side. Next would be to align the lift with the pallet. So make sure the lift platform fits between the system and the pallet. Confirm that both sides supports and legs are aligned with the pallet opening. Move lift under the system as far as possible to make sure you get the most contact with the platform. If the lift has a brake, engage it. If necessary, you may need to cut the cardboard flaps. Raise the lift platform until the system clears the foam base. Move the system close to the lift to prevent it from hanging off the platform. If the lift has brakes, release it. Move the lift away from the packaging. Once clear from the pallet, lower the system so it can be transported closer to the ground. So once you move the mechanical lift closer to the rack, make sure that the system is aligned with the rack. If the lift has a brake, enable it so it helps the lift from not moving. Also confirm that the rack is bolted down and that the feet are down, or you may ask someone to hold the rack before you push the system onto the rack mount kit. So in order to install the system in the rack, make sure you raise lift platform to 1/4 of an inch above the lip of the rack mount kit. Slowly push the system into the rack, which makes sure it's between the rails. Once the system is at least 3/4 on the way in, lower the lift platform to prevent damage to the system front. Then push the system all the way until the ears are flush with the rack post. This step could also be manually done by manually pushing the rack from the front. Once the system is installed, just make sure that all the 4 captive screws are installed in front of the system. Install the bezel, and then we can proceed with the cabling of the system. Cabling of the system. The first step is to make sure that you understand the rear panel. So the topmost portion is the GPU board tray. The lower portion is the motherboard tray, where you have all the other components, where you will see a BMC, USB port, the network port, the KVM port, the display port, the network storage port, the compute cluster network ports. On the bottommost you would find the power supplies. So there are 6 power supplies on the system. So network cabling is an important part in the system. So you would typically find approximately 8 to 9 different ports. There are some InfiniBand ports and Ethernet ports available on the system. Support 0, 1, 2, 3, port 6, 7, 8, 9. These are InfiniBand ports usually used for cluster networking. These can be configured in InfiniBand mode and used for clustering the system with other nodes in the environment. Ethernet configuration is also available as optional. Then you would find storage network cards that can be configured in Ethernet modes. Typically, these are used for connecting this system to the storage. So slot 4 is usually populated for connecting it to the storage. Slot 5 is an option available that can be bought during the initial purchase, and there is definitely an option if people would want to use an InfiniBand configuration that is also available. So the next is the crash cart management, which involves the VGA and the USB port. This you could use a cable which could where you could attach the VGA and USB cable to a remote KVM system, or you could use standard monitor and a keyboard for management. There is also an option for remote management which requires connecting at least a 1 gig Ethernet cable to a LAN and the BMC port. These are used for managing the operating system and also managing the BMC. So people who are not well versed with the terminology, BMC is the remote management capability on an Nvidia A100 system. So this is a standard port which was even available on the previous generation system like the DGX1 and DGX2. So next important step is to connect to the BMC management network. So how do we connect the DGX A100 BMC port to a BMC network? So for this we would need a Cat5 Ethernet cable, which usually is not included in the box. So you would need to plug the cable into a dedicated BMC RJ45 port, which is a 1 gig port as indicated in this picture. The other side of the cable is to be patched to a switch port. The next is to connect the system management network. So there is a port available which is for the system management network where you would need to connect a Cat5 cable, and this is typically a 1 gig port, and the other side needs to be patched to a switch. So the next step would be to install the storage networking and to configure the ports. So you would have to connect a DGX A100, the dual port 200 gig card, to the storage network. So for this you would have to make sure that you have the DAC cable and or the fiber cable with QSFP56 transceivers. So the ports that you see here indicated in green are the ports used for storage networking. There is also an option for customers to order additional Mellanox X6 VPI dual port NIC. So once you connect the cables, the other side needs to be connected to the appropriate switch ports, and the option card is either you could purchase it with your initial purchase or you could buy it later on after the Next, we would configure and install the compute cluster network. So for this, you would need the DGX A100 to connect to a high-speed InfiniBand network. So the ports that are indicated, there are 4 ports on the left and the 4 ports on the right that you see. So you would need to make sure that you have the appropriate DAC cable or fiber cable with QSFP56 transceivers. Plug the cables transceivers to the cluster port as shown in the picture, and the other side of the connection goes to the patch panel or the switch port. The final step is to make sure that you have the right set of cables and transceivers. So these are the specification of the cables. So BMC and the integrated NIC. You need an Ethernet with RJ45 interface, mostly compatible with Cat4, Cat5, Cat6, or even Cat7. So the options are available. Uh, it supports 10, 100, 1000 Mbps speed. For storage and compute cluster. So for storage you have 2, and you have compute cluster you have 8 port that dual mode NICs available. It supports InfiniBand, Ethernet, start from 200, 200, 500, 25, 10 and 1 gig that is supported. You could either use a DAC cable or a fiber cable with transceivers. So there are 6 power supplies in the system providing N+N redundancy. Each with one inlet supports C20, C19 cables, 15 amp up to 240 watts of power. Before you proceed with the installation, you would need to make sure that you and confirm that which PDUs would be used for. Ideally, you would need 2 different PDUs for connecting the systems, and at least 3 power supply needs to be functional in order for system to be operational. Power cords. To insert the power cord, just push the cable into the PDU socket, and to remove, just press the clip together and pull the cord out of the socket. The sides toward the power supply. To insert or remove, make sure that the cable is unlocked and push or pull into or out of the socket. To unlock the power cord, move the switch to the unlocked position. Indicator will show as green. And to lock the power cord, move the switch to the locked position. Indicator will show only red. So there are 6 power cables which are C19C20 power cables that are provided to connect the server to the power distribution unit in the rack. Make sure the cables do not obstruct the access to the GPU tray, the motherboard tray, or the power supply itself. Some of the examples of how the servers are racked and cabled. So on the left, you see a rack which is wider and it provides a space for wider PDUs plus the cable that sticks out. On the right, you see PDUs that are racks mounted and it takes no space on the sides of the rack. Usually I have seen the PDUs that are mounted on the rack on the sides. So these are the usual deployments that I've come across, but yes, you could use any of these options that are available. So these are some of the best practices. So just ensure that the cables are guided properly and they are tied or grouped using a Velcro strap to ensure the ability to easily service a DGX, such as removing or extracting a tray, good visibility and access to the rear of the DGX, limit the impact of the cables to the airflow or the exhaust. Be careful in handling and installing the Twinix cables. This ensures the cables being used, the correct connectors for the adapters being connected. Do also check the cables are certified for the adapter and make sure you do not bend these cables beyond the radius limits. If you have followed all this information included in the pre-delivery site survey forms and the steps we went through so far, you should be able to set up which looks like this. You would have at least 2 cables of Cat5 connected, one each to BMC and the other one to the integrated NIC. You would have 2 QSFP56 cables connected to the dual port connector X6 on the motherboard tray. You would have 8 QSFP56 cable connected to the 8 single port connect X6 on the IO tray. You would have 6 power supply power cords, the C19 C20 power cords connected to the power supplies. So now that we have wrapped up the installation and did the physical installation along with the cabling, the next step would be to run the first boot process. The second step would be run through the firmware update process, and finally we would need to do the physical connection of the server to the Mellanox switch, the InfiniBand switch or Ethernet switch uh, to do the network configuration. So the DGX A100, the first boot, which is a one-time process, right? So the DGX OS needs to be provided with a minimal configuration on the first boot up. So like some of the configuration includes creating an initial administrative users, setting up BMC access, username and password. The BMC username and password are the administrative username. Select the NIC for the network access. So you would be prompted either if you want to do a manual configuration if the DHCP fails. You would have to also make sure that the EULA agreement is accepted. Select the appropriate language and the local preference. Select the keyboard and the layout, and also setting up the time zone and the system clock. So connecting to the BMS, which is the first step. So first is to get a BMC IP address. So set the BMC IP address from the BIOS of the system. In order to access the BMC, you need a web browser, and you need to go to the IP address through secure HTTPS. Once you get the landing page, you would be prompted to enter a username and password. The factory username and password for an A100 is admin, and the password is dgxluna.admin. And if you already have a system that is configured with an admin username ID, then the user ID and the password would be the user ID. You could also use a tool called an IPMI tool in case you want to recover the IP address of the BMC, and if the IP address is unknown. So once the BMC is set up, the next step would be to configure the network. So you would have to choose the right port. So choose the right Ethernet port from the option and wait for the configuration to complete. So in case DHCP is not available, you would ask to manually enter the IP address. So you would have to provide a static IP address. And in this case, you would need to ask the customer for the IP address, netmask, and the gateway information. So once the network is configured during the first boot process, the system is now ready for the first use, and you would be prompted for the login credentials. So where you would need to enter the admin credentials like username and password to log into the system. So some of the main requirements to ensure that the DGX operating system is up to date is to ensure that you have the system has access to the internet, right? So some of the update connectivity requirements includes updated package with most recent version which is installed, which needs to be installed in the system. You would also need to make sure that you are aware of what version is installed and what has been any recent change in the OS release which needs to be installed in the system. You also need to use apt a standard Ubuntu package manager which helps you to do the upgrade of different various system packages. The DGX OS needs to be initiate connection to following sites for software updates and container updates. So you would need to make sure that the system has internet access and make sure that the firewall are not blocking these websites. So ensure that you have access to Nvidia portal, which is the international.download.nvidia.com DGX repository. You also make sure that the network has access to GitHub. You have access to Ubuntu and have access to the NVIDIA container repository along with the Docker repositories. So you would need to verify this so the system is able to connect and download up-to-date packages into the system. So once the different packages are installed, we would need to ensure that the system DGX A100 firmware is up to date. So here's an overview about the firmware update process and the procedure. So the firmware is distributed as a single blob usually. So it helps in reduced external dependencies, system level versioning, and single interface for usage, and it is automation friendly. The firmware also includes the target and the release information, the platform name, the release date, and versioning. So literally, if you read the name of the file, so in this case, NVFW stands for NVIDIA firmware, DGX A100 stands for the system or the platform name, and then you see the release date. In this case, you see 20, which means year 2020. 03 stands for the month, and 1 stands for the version. So this is how you could translate the information on the file name So the next step would be to retrieve the firmware file in order to update the system. So there are two ways of updating the firmware. The first option is to directly update the firmware from the Nvidia GPU cloud or the NGC, what we call, which is an automated download. The second option is through the enterprise support portal of Nvidia, where you need to manually download the file. For this, you need to log in with your enterprise portal credentials. You need to also ensure that the system has a valid support, and then you can search for the eligible firmware files, which would include the Docker image and the binary version, and you could also download them manually and update the system. So the next step is to load the Docker image. So you could go to the command prompt, type sudo docker images, gives you the information about the file, the system, the file name, the tag, the image ID, the size of the file, the release note and instructions are always available on the Nvidia website, which is docs.nvidia.com/dgx / and the system name. In this case, if you need information on A100, it would be A100. And once you load the file, it evokes Docker to check the version, the firmware version, and provides you all the information about the firmware. So the other option to check the firmware version is through the native binary by directly calling the binary. So in this case, the command would be sudo dot / nvfw, the file name, space show version. So another way of checking the firmware version by invoking NVSM, the NVIDIA System Management. In this case, the command would be sudo space NVSM show firmware. So the next step would be to prepare the firmware update. So in this case, you need to load the Docker image into the system. It could be pulled either from the NGC via Dockers or through NVSM. So this is a command that we use in order to start the firmware update process. So here are the steps that you need to follow in order to load the Docker image into the system. You could either log into the Nvidia Enterprise Support portal and download the image from the portal and transfer it to the system and load the image into the Docker. Need to verify what is the current version of the firmware on the system, upgrade all the necessary components or the elements of the firmware, and also make sure that once the firmware is updated, verify it that the new firmware is installed. Another option is to update the firmware through NVSM. So you need to start the NVSM, check the firmware that is installed, set the parameter, and start the installation. There are many shortcuts that are available in NVSM. For example, NVSM show firmware to check the current version of the firmware, NVSM update firmware to invoke the firmware update process. Next is how to set up the network configuration settings on the system. So the first step would be to set up the BMC network settings. Generally, a DGX BMC is set for DHCP by default, but if you want to use a static address for the BMC, it is better to use an IPMI tool to change the settings. Here are some of the commands that you need to follow. So IPMI tool space LAN set1 IPSRC space static IPMI tool space LAN space set1 space IP adder. So these are the command that you need to follow in order to set the IP address. You could also use the same tool if you want to change or add the address of the BMC username and password. So once you set up the BMC IP, next step would be to configure the IP of your Ethernet interface. So you have to go to the command prompt, and the command is sudo space vi space /etc/netplan/01 netcfg.yaml. So this is the command that is used in order to configure the IP address on the system. You could also refer to the Ubuntu website or the server guide in order to configure the network. There is also an option to add proxy settings for the network configuration. So you have to type the command sudo space vi space etc/environment, and this allows you to type the proxy settings that is required. And this information is also available in the documentation provided on the Ubuntu server guide. So here we talk about changing between InfiniBand and the Ethernet. This case we need to make sure that we have the Mellanox software tool installed and configured and it's running, which is the command that you see here, mst. We need to identify the card that needs to be configured. Here are the steps in terms of querying the card, identifying the right card that needs to be modified. So here are the steps to identify the current status of the ports. So MLX config indicates how many ports are currently configured. So link underscore type 1 in this case is configured as InfiniBand, and type 2 is the Ethernet. You would need to match the device name from the MST test status to the configuration shown by the MLX config command. So here are the steps which would help you to modify the desired network configuration. So you need to use the device name from the MST output, use the MLX config to set the configuration, if you want to change uh, the configuration from InfiniBand to Ethernet. So once the configuration is changed, the system requires a reboots in order to take the new configuration. You could also query the system and observe how the output of the desired configuration has changed. So here are the commands that you would use to change the InfiniBand to Ethernet. So in this case, you see all the the Mellanox cards are in Ethernet modes. So once you change the settings, the system requires a reboot to take the new settings. Any chance if you want to find the Ethernet names of the network cards, you use the mst status-v command to see the Ethernet network names. How to configure the DGX A100 storage. DGX A100 storage is quite similar to the DGX1 or DGX2. So here is a quick functionality refresher for everyone. What a file system cache is, what a DGX managed storage would be, and how to implement an FSC on a DGX A100. So what is a file system cache or FSC cache? So FSC caches the NFC client request into a local storage. The goal is to increase the NFC read-write I/O performance. It also improves the performance and reduces the storage network or a NAS usage. So in a DGX A100, that includes 4 or 8x 15 TB or a 32 TB NVMe in a RAID 0. NVMe drives are used exclusively for cache purpose and uses the network attached storage for persistent data usage. Through the details about how the file system cache is implemented on a DGX A100 system. So on a typical enterprise environment, you would have your DGX A100, which would have the NVMe storage, which is used for caching purpose. You would also have your drives for the operating system, which are usually mirrored. So it is of 1.92 TB. And then you have your NFS or the shared storage, which is mounted on the DGX from an external storage. So here are the commands that you could use to mount the NFS volume. So the next and the final section is the NVSM, the NVIDIA System Management. So what is an NVSM? It's a framework for monitoring and managing DGX nodes. It's a standard based representation of system and its health. It provides you all kind of notification in terms of the system health, faults, or any potential or predictive failures on the system. It helps you to monitor the health of the system, and also you could generate or collect logs for support purposes. It also helps in probing or diagnosing the health of the hardware of an DGX. It is available also as a CLI utility, and APIs are also available to integrate with third-party systems if required. Just a quick example on what is NVSM for. So use cases generally or typically it is used for active health monitoring and alerting purpose. So let's say if a drive is failing, uh, you would get a notification in terms of drive failure from a RAID array. If you have a GPU link failed, it will give you an error, right? If a RAID is rebuilding, you would see all those notification on the NVSM, right? So generally you could current all kind of logs from the system on the system health. It also helps you in troubleshooting. So this is a typical NVSM architecture. So it's a tool which uses a standard CLI user interface, and you have the DGX system health monitoring elements, which communicates through a communication protocol through HTTPS through a web service which uses MQTT broker and a MongoDB where all the events are stored. And we have the OS tools that are used to pull all the services and configuration. And at the end, we have all the underlying hardware. The typical user interface, we have the NVSM application, which is accessed through CLI, where you also have the health monitoring and alert engine, and you have different plugins to collect the information to a time series database, which could be collected in a private or a public cloud, and you could use a dashboard to view the data. See, NVSM user interface can be accessed through CLI, or you could access this through SMTP interface, which is primarily used for sending email alerts. Or it also has a REST interface, which is primary API for third. Here's a quick overview on the APIs that are available from the NVSM. You could find more information on this on Nvidia website on docs.nvidia.com/datacenter NVSM/NVSM API. So NVSM CLI or in-band CLI for DGX. It allows user to manage, monitor, and even configure the DGX service. It's included in a DGX system with the NVSM installed. And if you run a command man space NVSM, it provides you the details. You could also use NVSM space hyphen help, and you could get all the commands that are relevant to the NVSM. Here is a quick overview on different common CLI commands that are available. For example, you see here NVSM space show alerts. It shows all the alerts that are generated by the NVSM monitor. Another example is NVSM show space temps, which shows the temperature logs or temperature readings on the system. Here we comes to the end of the hardware installation of DGX A100. I thank you everyone who joined, and if you have any questions, please let me know. I'll be more than happy to answer.